When Rome's downfall enters conversation, visions emerge of invading hordes breaching defenses, military forces crumbling, or rulers murdered within ornate chambers. Yet civilizations don't disintegrate solely through external assault. They decay internally, and among the most destructive elements is invariably currency. Rome's collapse wasn't purely about invasions or systematic corruption. It collapsed because its monetary system failed, and the insights from that failure remain relevant to every contemporary economy believing it can manipulate money without consequences. Let's establish context. Throughout centuries, Rome's financial foundation was the silver denarius. Initially created approximately 201 before the Common Era, it contained nearly pure silver, accepted throughout the empire and beyond. Roman military personnel received payment in it, traders required it, and common citizens preserved their prosperity in it. The denarius transcended being merely currency, it embodied trust in metallic form. The empire's strength and the coin's worth were interconnected. While people maintained faith in Rome, they maintained faith in its currency. Yet managing an empire demands resources. Military forces required compensation, infrastructure and water systems constructed, and conflicts funded. By the 2nd century of the Common Era, Rome was overextended, protecting boundaries against Germanic peoples, Parthians eastward, and internal disruption. Revenue from taxation couldn't match military expenditures, so rulers resorted to a timeless maneuver, dilution. Rather than increasing citizen taxation, perpetually unpopular, they decreased the silver proportion in the denarius. The statistics reveal the narrative. During Emperor Augustus's reign, who governed at the empire's beginning, the denarius held approximately 95% silver. By Caracalla's leadership in the early 3rd century, it had declined to roughly 50%. By Emperor Gallienus's era in the mid-3rd century, the denarius held under 5% silver. A coin, previously crafted from solid metal, had transformed into a bronze disc covered with silver coating. Citizens could observe and detect the transformation. Price increases followed. Costs escalated because currency was no longer tied to genuine worth. A wheat quantity that previously cost 1 denarius might abruptly cost dozens. This wasn't theoretical abstraction. It devastated typical Roman lives. Military personnel demanded increased compensation to address escalating expenses. Traders ceased accepting diluted coins, choosing barter or gold transactions. Regional economies returned to direct exchange because the currency lost credibility, and as confidence deteriorated, emperors produced cheaper coins, expecting quantity would substitute for quality. It became a destructive spiral, the identical spiral that has recurred in numerous inflations since. The emergency culminated during the termed crisis of the 3rd century. Between 235 and 284 of the Common Era, Rome endured nearly 50 years of turmoil, invasions, epidemics, internal conflicts, and economic breakdown. Rulers ascended and descended at bewildering velocity, occasionally governing merely months before assassination. Underlying the political spectacle was a shattered financial framework. Levies were required in coins worth progressively less. Agricultural workers deserted their properties rather than remit payment. Commercial networks fragmented, and Roman authority attempted frantic interventions, from price restrictions to mandatory labor requirements, to maintain system functionality. Nothing succeeded. One ruler, Diocletian, attempted halting the deterioration. In 301 of the Common Era, he proclaimed the Edict on Maximum Prices, establishing costs for over 1,000 commodities and services, from grain to employment compensation. Offenders confronted execution. The edict proved catastrophic. Costs couldn't be regulated by proclamation when the currency itself held no value. Underground commerce flourished and legitimate commerce virtually ceased. Citizens discovered rapidly that legislation couldn't restore a corrupted coin. Ultimately, Rome discarded the denarius completely. Constantine the Great introduced the solidus, a gold coin of uniform fineness, approximately 312 of the Common Era. It re-established some security and persisted for centuries in the Eastern Roman or Byzantine Empire. Yet by that moment, the Western Empire was already fatally compromised. The denarius dilution had gutted Rome's economic foundation. Military forces could no longer be maintained. Commercial networks had collapsed, and confidence had vanished. Rome's fall wasn't a singular occurrence, but a prolonged disintegration. Currency breakdown was among its most severe threats. What does this signify for contemporary society? It signifies that monetary destruction invariably means civilization destruction. Rome believed it could deceive its population by distributing coins appearing identical, but holding diminished genuine worth. Contemporary governments believe they can accomplish the same through paper production, interest rate manipulation, or debt inflation. Yet the result invariably matches. Citizens bear the burden, prosperity is obliterated, and confidence disintegrates. Rome absorbed this principle through hardship, and if we disregard it, we shall likewise. Historical instruction didn't conclude after Rome. Every significant inflationary emergency since has duplicated the identical sequence. Governments dilute currency to address their expenses. Privileged classes shield themselves with tangible possessions, and typical citizens are left impoverished. The Roman monetary emergency is simply the earliest comprehensive illustration, a template for breakdown. Advance to the 20th century, and the parallels are thunderous. Following World War I, Germany confronted overwhelming reparations under the Versailles Treaty. The government manufactured marks to address its commitments, believing it could cover debt just as Rome had previously struck additional coins. By 1923, hyperinflation was devastating. A bread loaf costing 1 mark before conflict cost over 200 billion marks by that year's autumn. Citizens transported compensation home in carts. Retirees perished as their lifetime accumulations vanished, and just as in Rome, those holding obligations found them eliminated by inflation, while those possessing tangible assets, property, manufacturing facilities, foreign currency emerged more powerful. Currency became insignificant, and the economic anguish stimulated political radicalism that established conditions for Hitler's ascension. Zimbabwe pursued the identical trajectory in the early 2000s. Confronting property confiscations, declining output, and increasing obligations, the government utilized the printing apparatus. By 2008, inflation had achieved a staggering magnitude, an annual proportion of 89.7 sextillion%. Costs doubled daily. Establishments couldn't modify labels sufficiently quickly. Eventually, Zimbabwe discontinued its currency completely, compelling citizens to exchange in United States dollars or South African rand. Again, a government believed it could circumvent reality. Again, citizens bore the burden, yet you needn't examine only extremes. Even in contemporary developed economies, the Roman sequence continues. Consider the United States. In 1971, President Richard Nixon removed the dollar from the gold standard, breaking the final connection between currency and a concrete foundation. From that instant, the dollar became what economists term a fiat currency, supported not by gold but by governmental trust. And just as in Rome, the attraction to expend beyond resources became overwhelming. Throughout subsequent decades, obligations expanded, currency supply increased, and inflation became a persistent undercurrent. While we haven't witnessed carts of currency, we have witnessed a continuous erosion of buying capacity. $1 in 1971 could purchase what requires more than $6 presently. The coins appear identical, the notes appear identical, yet the worth has been excavated. The deception invariably matches. Governments disguise inflation as expansion. They inform citizens that elevated compensation means prosperity, even as expenses rise more rapidly. They characterize debt as investment, even when it finances consumption. They indicate rising equity markets as prosperity evidence, even when the majority possess minimal or no equity whatsoever. Just like Roman emperors, they simulate that nothing fundamental has transformed, while discreetly extracting worth from every coin, every note, every salary. What renders this hazardous presently is that the magnitude is planetary. Rome's breakdown was an imperial emergency. Weimar's hyperinflation was nationwide. Zimbabwe's was regional. Yet presently, the entire planet operates on fiat currencies. Enormous obligations and central banking institutions prepared to manufacture trillions at initial emergency indications. That signifies the subsequent breakdown won't be restricted to a solitary empire or nation. It will cascade throughout the planet. And if historical evidence provides guidance, those who endure won't be the privileged classes holding possessions, but the millions who depend on compensation, retirement funds, and accumulations denominated in progressively vulnerable currencies. So what should you, as an individual, extract from Rome's monetary emergency? Initially, comprehend that inflation isn't accidental. It is deliberate policy. It is the concealed levy that has shattered empires for 2,000 years. Subsequently, Recognize that genuine prosperity is not located in paper or electronic figures, but in possessions that maintain worth when currency does not. Property, capabilities, productive enterprises, resources. Third, never presume security is everlasting. Romans in the 1st century would have ridiculed if informed their coins would eventually be meaningless. Germans in 1913 would have dismissed the notion of carts filled with currency. Zimbabweans in the 1980s believed their independence guaranteed prosperity. Yet, in each instance, the identical narrative developed. Rome's fall reminds us that financial frameworks can break down gradually, then abruptly, as confidence evaporates. When currency ceases being genuine, civilization itself begins unraveling. Agreements fail, commerce collapses, military forces dissolve, and governments forfeit legitimacy. The invaders at the boundary may complete the destruction, yet the genuine threat is invariably inside the treasury. And here is the conclusion. Historical events don't duplicate, yet if you don't comprehend them, they will devastate you equally. The Roman monetary emergency wasn't purely about incompetent emperors or avaricious privileged classes. It was about currency's vulnerability itself when misused by authority. And that vulnerability has never disappeared. If this provided you a fresh perspective, hit subscribe. Historical knowledge contains the solutions, and I'll reveal where to discover them.